I want you to just picture something for a second. Transport yourself back in time to a kindergarten classroom, maybe circa 1989.
Oh, wow. Okay, setting the scene.
Right. And if you close your eyes, you can probably summon the exact sensory details. You can smell that distinct waxy scent of the crayons.
Oh, absolutely. The Crayola smell.
Exactly. And you can hear the chaotic, high-pitched hum of like 30 small children figuring out how to just exist in a shared space.
That's a lot of noise.
It really is. You can see the brightly colored wooden blocks scattered across one of those faded alphabet rugs. And this is the key here, beneath that innocent surface of finger paints and snack time, there is this brutal, invisible social hierarchy that is constantly at work.
Oh, the playground is ruthless.
It is a ruthless place. And in that environment, the absolute worst, most devastating phrase you can possibly hear is, "You can't play with us."
Yeah, I mean, it is a profoundly isolating experience, and the psychological impact of it, even at, 4 or 5 years old, is staggering. For a child, being told they cannot participate isn't just a minor disappointment. It is the absolute definition of social devastation. It's basically their first real taste of exile.
Which is wild to think about. And in that specific era, there was this MacArthur award-winning teacher named Vivian Paley who recognized the severity of that devastation.
She did incredible work.
She really did. She did something completely radical in her classroom. She instituted a single non-negotiable rule. The rule was simply, you can't say you can't play.
Just that simple.
That was it. She effectively used her authority to ban social exclusion entirely. And what she documented in the months and years after that was just astonishing.
I can imagine.
She observed this palpable, immediate relief that swept through the children. They felt rescued from the inherent meanness of being left out.
Right, because by providing this structural safety net, she allowed them to just exist,
Yeah.
to learn and to socialize without that constant looming terror of being suddenly exiled from the group.
Which is such a primal fear.
Yeah. It's a beautifully simple intervention because it addresses a fear that is completely primal. Exactly. We tend to look at children and assume their social lives are simple or that their squabbles are trivial.
Right, like, oh, they're just kids fighting over a toy.
Exactly. But in reality, they are experiencing the raw, unfiltered mechanisms of human group dynamics. They are testing the boundaries of inclusion and exclusion without any of the polite societal filters we develop later in life.
But the thing is, we outgrow the kindergarten rug, obviously.
Most of us do.
Right. We outgrow the sandbox and the brightly colored blocks. But we absolutely never outgrow the pain of that exclusion. The mechanics of it just evolve.
Yeah, it takes on a different form.
Instead of a kid physically blocking you from the toy kitchen and saying, you can't play, it morphs into the adult world. And in adult relationships, whether it's a marriage, a friendship, or, a dynamic with a coworker, the most potent, most devastating form of this playground exclusion takes the shape of the silent treatment.
It really does. It's pervasive.
And the reason it hurts so much isn't just psychological. It is buried deep in our neurology. And that is exactly what we are dissecting today.
It's going to be a fascinating discussion.
We are pulling from a massive stack of research for this deep dive, including a brand new, comprehensive 2026 systematic review on the antecedents and consequences of the silent treatment in close adult relationships.
That review is incredibly thorough.
It really is. But we're also crossing disciplines today. We're going deep into the neurobiology of social pain, with research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and the journal Psychosomatic Medicine.
Right.
Along with some really great insights on rejection sensitivity from the Calm Psychological Framework.
We are bridging a fascinating gap here today. We are looking at the behaviors we inflict on each other in our living rooms and our offices and mapping them directly onto what is physically happening inside our brain cells and our nervous systems when those behaviors occur.
It's mind-blowing. And I'm going to tease the destination of this deep dive right now, because the core concept we are about to uncover is genuinely hard to wrap your head around.
It really challenges how we think about pain.
By the time we finish mapping this out, you will understand exactly why a broken heart and a broken bone look nearly identical in an fMRI machine.
It's incredible.
And we are going to explore the biological mechanisms that explain how taking an over-the-counter physical painkiller like standard acetaminophen can actually chemically suppress your hurt feelings.
It forces a complete reframing of how we think about emotional pain. We are so used to treating heartache as a metaphor, But the data shows us it is a biological somatic reality.
Before we get to the brain scanners, though, the literal anatomy of a broken heart and the pharmacology of it all. We have to establish a clear understanding of the behavior that triggers this specific biological alarm.
Right, we need to define the trigger.
We need to dissect the silent treatment itself. The 2026 systematic review provides a very specific framework for this. How does the clinical literature define what we casually call the silent treatment?
Well, the review categorizes the silent treatment as a distinct form of social exclusion. They specifically label it in the behavioral literature as quiet silence.
Quiet silence.
Yeah, and it is crucial to distinguish it from overt conflict. It's not yelling, it's not throwing plates, it's not an active, heated argument.
It's the opposite of that, really.
Exactly. It is the deliberate, conscious avoidance of communication. It is an emotional and verbal withdrawal where one person intentionally ignores, refuses to speak to, or just outright refuses to acknowledge the presence of another person.
It's the weaponization of an absence.
That's a great way to put it.
It is creating a void where a relationship, or at least a basic human interaction, is supposed to be.
Yeah.
But why do people do it? If we all know how terrible it feels to be on the receiving end, why is this behavior so incredibly common across virtually all cultures and all types of relationships?
The motivation generally fractures into two broad, very different categories.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first category is emotion-focused coping. This occurs when the giver of the silent treatment is fundamentally overwhelmed by their own internal state.
Like they're just flooding emotionally.
Exactly. They are experiencing a massive flood of negative affect, intense distress, confusion, frustration. In this state, they use silence as a self-protective barrier.
Okay, so they're shutting down to protect themselves.
They literally shut down the communicative pathway because they lack the emotional regulation tools to process the conflict or the stimuli in real time without escalating.
So in that first scenario, the intent isn't necessarily malicious.
Not inherently, no.
The giver is drowning emotionally, the water is rising too fast, and they just hit the emergency mute button on the relationship to stop taking on water.
Mm-hmm.
They are protecting themselves, not necessarily trying to destroy the other person.
That is a very fair assessment of that specific motivation. But the second category is where the behavior becomes deeply toxic and destructive.
This is the manipulation side of it.
Yes. This is when the silent treatment is deployed as a calculated manipulation or power tactic. In this context, silence is used to punish.
Wow.
It is used to express intense, unyielding disapproval or to coerce a partner into changing their behavior, apologizing, or capitulating to a demand.
So it's a control mechanism.
It is a highly effective, low-cost, high-impact means of exerting control. And this is especially prevalent in asymmetric relationships where one person already holds more relational or emotional power.
That makes me wonder about the personality architecture of the person giving the silent treatment. Who is most likely to use this as a weapon? Because the sources dives into some very specific psychological profiles.
They do. The foundational research on this, spearheaded by David Buss and later expanded upon by others, links the frequent punitive use of the silent treatment to specific traits within the Big Five personality model.
Okay, what do they find?
They found incredibly strong correlations with high neuroticism.
Neuroticism. Meaning what, exactly, in a clinical sense?
Neuroticism indicates emotional instability, volatility, and a tendency to interpret ordinary situations as threatening.
Okay, that makes sense.
They also found a strong correlation with low agreeableness. Individuals who score low in agreeableness are naturally less likely to prioritize relationship harmony or empathy.
They just don't care as much about keeping the peace.
Right. They are far more willing to use coercive, withdrawal-based tactics to bend a partner to their will.
But the 2026 review also incorporates some newer, darker research. I am looking at the 2015 study by Hyla, which brings the dark triad traits into the equation.
Yeah, that addition completely changes the landscape of how we view this behavior.
How so?
Hyla's team observed that psychopathy-linked traits, specifically the traits of meanness and disinhibition, particularly in male subjects, were significant predictors for the frequent use of the silent treatment.
Wait, really? Psychopathy-linked traits?
Yes. When you introduce psychopathy-linked traits, the silence is no longer about emotional overwhelm at all. It is intrinsically linked to moral disengagement.
It's cold calculation.
It demonstrates a callous, impulsive disregard for the partner's emotional state. The silence is a tool of dominance, applied with a chilling lack of empathy for the suffering it causes.
That is terrifying.
Mm-hmm.
But to be fair to the scope of the research, the data doesn't just point to aggressive, Machiavellian, or psychopathic personalities,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely not.
There's an entirely different demographic highlighted in the literature that uses this tactic heavily, but for vastly different structural reasons.
Yes, and this is where socialization plays a massive role. Research by Mandel and Ruchcho indicates that shy individuals, and statistically, particularly shy women, are highly prone to adopting nonverbal avoidance tactics.
Which includes sulking and the silent treatment.
Exactly. But the underlying mechanism here isn't dominance. It is defensive. It reflects a heavily gendered socialization regarding conflict.
Because women are often taught not to be angry?
Right. In many cultures, direct confrontation, anger, or overt disagreement are socially penalized in women. Therefore, shy women might use silence defensively or as an indirect way to signal deep dissatisfaction because direct verbal confrontation feels psychologically unsafe.
Or it just violates their internalized expectations of how they are supposed to behave.
Precisely.
Okay, let's unpack this for a second. I want to pause and challenge the framing here.
Sure.
Because if I'm reading an advice column from a licensed couples therapist, one of the most common, highly recommended tools for healthy conflict resolution is taking a timeout.
Right. Stepping away from the argument.
Yeah. If an argument is getting too heated, you are supposed to take a break.
So where exactly is the mechanical line between a responsible, mature adult taking some space to cool off and a toxic partner inflicting the silent treatment? Aren't they both just the cessation of talking?
Mechanically, yes, they are both a pause in communication, but psychologically, they are universes apart.
The essential distinction lies in communication and boundaries, and this is perfectly explained by expectancy violation theory.
Okay, walk me through that.
A healthy therapeutic timeout is explicitly communicated. It involves one partner saying, I am feeling completely flooded right now. I cannot have a productive conversation. I need to take a walk for 45 minutes to calm down, and then we will sit back down and figure this out.
So you are stating the boundary, you are
Uh-huh.
explaining the internal state, and most importantly, you are providing a timeline for return.
Exactly.
You are not severing the relational tie, you are just pausing the clock.
Right.
The safety of the relationship is maintained.
Right. The partner left behind might be frustrated, but they are not plunged into existential panic. The silent treatment, conversely, is a punitive withdrawal entirely devoid of communication or boundaries.
You don't know why it started.
And you don't know when or if it will end. And this ties deeply into a cognitive distortion researchers call mind-reading expectations, or MRE.
Mind-reading expectations. Let me guess, if you really loved me, you would just know why I'm mad.
That is the exact phrase. People who rely on the silent treatment often operate under the delusion that their internal state should be obvious to their partner.
Which is impossible.
Right. When the partner inevitably fails to read their mind, the giver perceives this as neglect. This perceived neglect heightens their disappointment, so they punish the partner with silence.
Wow.
Expectancy violation theory shows us that when unstated relational expectations are breached, the silence itself becomes the message. It is a broadcast of profound disapproval designed to make the other person suffer in a void until they somehow decipher the unstated crime.
It is literally Kafkaesque. You are put on trial, you are found guilty, the punishment is immediate emotional abandonment, but no one will tell you what the charges are.
That's a perfect analogy.
And what is genuinely terrifying about this dynamic is how it propagates. The sources dig into a study by Rittenor, which looked at the intergenerational transmission of the silent treatment.
The Rittenor findings are incredibly sobering because they map out the contagion of the behavior.
Contagion is a good word for it.
Oh.
What did they find?
Rittenor's research demonstrated that adult children heavily mimic the conflict resolution styles modeled by their parents.
Okay.
If you were raised in a household where a mother or father used the silent treatment to express displeasure, to win arguments, or to exert control over the family dynamic, you're statistically far more likely to employ that exact same tactic in your own adult romantic relationships.
You are just running the software that was installed when you were a kid.
Exactly.
You learn that withholding love in communication is the most effective way to protect yourself or defeat an opponent.
It is socially transmitted. You internalize the architecture of silence as a normal component of intimacy.
That's so grim. So we have a very clear, multifaceted picture of the giver. We know they might be emotionally flooded, they might be highly neurotic or manipulative, they might be trapped in gendered conflict avoidance, or they might just be echoing their parents.
Right.
But let's turn the lens completely around. Why is this tactic so devastatingly effective? What is happening to the receiver that makes this so much worse than just being yelled at?
To understand the sheer destructive power of the silent treatment, we have to look at how it dismantles the receiver's psychological stability.
Okay.
The pioneering work on ostracism by researcher Kip Williams provides the framework here. He found that being on the receiving end of the silent treatment systematically threatens 4 fundamental human needs simultaneously.
4 needs at once.
Yes, it is a multi-front assault on the psyche.
Let's break those 4 needs down because I think understanding them is crucial to understanding why the pain feels so entirely out of proportion to the event. What's the first one?
The first is the need for belonging. We are, at our core, tribal animals. Our brains are hardwired to seek connection and integration with a group or an intimate partner.
Right.
When someone gives you the silent treatment, they are instantaneously severing that connection. They are simulating an exile.
Okay, simulating an exile. What's the second fundamental need?
The second fundamental need is self-esteem.
How does silence attack self-esteem, though? Because no one is actively insulting you. They aren't calling you names or putting you down.
Well, they don't have to. Our self-esteem is heavily regulated by how we are mirrored by those around us.
Oh, I see.
When a partner or friend completely ignores you, the implicit, undeniable message is that you are fundamentally unworthy of basic human acknowledgement.
That is brutal.
You are not worth the breath it takes to speak a word. That sends self-worth plummeting far faster than a direct insult, which you can at least argue against.
Which leads right into the third need, which is control.
Yes, the need for control or efficacy in your environment. When you are given the silent treatment, you are rendered completely powerless.
Because you can't force them to engage.
You cannot force vocal cords to vibrate. You cannot force someone to look at you. The giver holds 100% of the relational power, and you are trapped in a state of suspended animation, entirely dependent on their whim to resolve the situation.
You are just a hostage waiting for them to grant you existence again.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the fourth need, which, reading through the sources, struck me as the most profound.
The need for a meaningful existence. This goes beyond just wanting to belong. When someone looks through you, when they treat you as if your physical body is not occupying space in the room, it threatens your fundamental sense of reality.
Wow.
It is a psychological erasure. It induces a terrifying feeling of invisibility, as if your life does not actually matter or impact the world around you.
Psychological erasure. That is heavy. And the research shows it doesn't even take a prolonged, dramatic, days-long silent treatment to trigger this collapse. The sources bring up a study by Worth that focuses on something incredibly subtle, averted gaze.
Yes.
Walk me through how they tested this, because it sounds so simple.
The Worth study is fascinating because it proves how incredibly low the threshold is for this type of social pain. They designed an interaction where participants engage with someone who simply but intentionally refused to make eye contact with them.
So they didn't ignore them entirely.
No, they didn't ignore them entirely. They just kept their gaze averted during the interaction.
Just looking at the floor or over their shoulder.
Exactly, and the results were stunning. The data showed that this mere nonverbal cue, just the refusal to lock eyes, triggered the exact same feelings of exclusionary pain and the exact same measurable drop in those 4 basic needs satisfactions as a complete verbal silent treatment.
Just from not making eye contact.
Yes. The micro-expression of looking away communicates the identical psychological threat. You do not exist to me.
I was trying to come up with an analogy for how this feels, and the best I could think of is being unexpectedly locked out of your own house.
Oh, that's a good one.
Imagine yesterday, your key worked perfectly. You lived in the house, it was warm, your things were there, you belonged. Today, you walk up to the door, and the locks have been changed without any warning. You are left standing on the front lawn in the cold. You look through the living room window, and you see your partner inside.
Right.
They are just going about their day, making coffee, reading a book, and they are completely ignoring you, tapping on the glass. You are physically present, you can see the shared reality, but you are entirely barred from entering it.
That captures the panic perfectly.
And what is your immediate reaction? You don't just stand there peacefully, you stand on the lawn, and you begin to obsessively, frantically overanalyze every single thing you said or did over the last week, trying to figure out which specific action prompted them to change the locks.
What's fascinating here is that frantic overanalysis is the perfect entry point into the cognitive cost of the silent treatment.
The cognitive cost.
Yes, because doing that mental math, the obsessive rumination, the scanning of past memories for clues requires a massive amount of brain power. The systematic review details a series of quasi-experimental studies by Summer and Yoon that measured exactly this phenomenon, cognitive resource depletion.
I loved the design of this study. Explain the methodology because of the way they isolated the variables is just brilliant.
Summer and Yoon wanted to see if the act of ignoring someone or being ignored actually drains your mental battery. So they set up an experiment where participants were instructed to either actively converse with someone or actively ignore them. Crucially, they manipulated the identity of the other person to be either highly likable and pleasant or highly unlikable and obnoxious.
Okay, so it's a 2x2 grid.
Yeah.
You're either talking to or ignoring someone, and that person is either awesome or terrible.
Precisely. After this initial social interaction, all the participants were immediately given a highly difficult self-regulatory task.
What kind of task?
These are tasks that require intense focus, frustration tolerance, and mental energy, like solving complex puzzles or resisting temptations. The performance on the second task served as a measurement of how much cognitive fuel the social interaction had burned through.
So what happened to the givers, the people doing the ignoring?
This is where it gets interesting. If you were instructed to give the silent treatment to the unlikable person, the obnoxious, toxic individual, it actually preserved your cognitive resources.
Really?
Yes, you performed significantly better on the subsequent puzzles. By ignoring a troll, you saved your mental energy.
That tracks perfectly with lived experience. Hitting block on social media or walking away from an antagonist feels like a relief. It saves your sanity.
It does. But the flip side of the data reveals the hidden damage. When they looked at the receivers specifically, people who were ignored by a likable person, someone they valued or wanted to connect with their performance on the complex tasks, absolutely plummeted.
So they couldn't solve the puzzles.
Well, no. The psychological distress of the exclusion, the internal rumination, the desperate racing thoughts trying to solve the puzzle of why they were being shut out, it quite literally drained their brain's battery.
So it's not just that you feel sad. Your brain is physically diverting massive amounts of electrical and chemical energy away from executive function and into this social panic mode.
Exactly.
You're left so mentally exhausted that you can't regulate your own emotions or focus on basic tasks, which totally explains why people going through severe relationship conflicts or breakups frequently start failing at their jobs or dropping the ball on basic life management. The fuel tank is empty.
The social exclusion consumes the cognitive resources required for everyday functioning.
But this brings us to a massive foundational question. We know that social exclusion drains our cognitive resources. We know it erodes our self-esteem, threatens our sense of control, and simulates psychological death. The question is why?
Right, why are we built this way?
Why on earth are we wired to care this much? From an evolutionary standpoint, it seems incredibly inefficient. Why hasn't evolution given us a thicker skin? Why does a text message left on read or a coworker not inviting us to lunch send our biology into a literal tailspin?
To unravel that, we have to strip away the modern world and look at the problem from a purely evolutionary perspective. Imagine early Homo sapiens, hundreds of thousands of years ago, living on the savannah.
Okay.
Think about human reproduction. A human infant is born in a state of complete, unparalleled dependency.
Right, compared to other animals.
A baby horse or giraffe can stand up and run a few hours after birth. A human infant cannot even support the weight of its own head for months.
We are functionally useless at birth. We require intensive, constant care just to survive the night.
We do. And that dependency extends far beyond infancy. To a primal human, whether it is an infant separated from a primary caregiver or an adult ostracized from the hunter-gatherer tribe, social separation was not an emotional inconvenience.
It was death sentence.
It was a literal death sentence.
Right.
If you were cast out of the tribe, you could not hunt large game alone, you could not maintain a fire alone, you would freeze, you would starve, or you would be eaten by a predator. Survival was 100% dependent on your inclusion in the group.
So if being left out means literal physical death, the brain needs a warning system.
Exactly.
It needs an alarm that goes off the second your social standing is threatened.
Yeah.
And that alarm has to be so loud and so excruciatingly uncomfortable that it forces you to drop everything and do whatever it takes to get back into the tribe's good graces.
Right. But evolution is a tinkerer, not an inventor. It rarely builds a completely new biological system from scratch if it can just repurpose an existing one. And the mammalian brain already possessed a highly tuned, highly motivating alarm system designed to prevent physical death. The physical pain system.
Think about it like plugging a new appliance into an old electrical outlet.
That's a great way to visualize it. If you step on a sharp rock or touch a burning ember, the physical pain system screams, pull your foot back, pull your hand away, avoid tissue damage immediately.
Right.
Evolution essentially took the newly required social attachment system and plugged it directly into the pre-existing physical pain circuitry.
It hijacked the hardware.
Yes.
And we can actually see the ghosts of this evolutionary shortcut in our everyday language, can't we?
It is ubiquitous. Across vastly diverse languages, cultures, and continents globally, humans use the exact same vocabulary to describe social damage as we do physical tissue damage.
We say, my feelings are hurt.
We say, I have a broken heart. We describe the sting of rejection or feeling crushed by a disappointment. For a long time, psychologists assumed this was just a universal poetic metaphor because we lacked better words. But the neuroscience proves it is not a metaphor at all. It is our language accurately describing our underlying biology.
The language is a clue, but the sources provide hard, indisputable neuroimaging proof of this shared circuitry. We need to walk through the Cyberball fMRI study.
Oh, the Eisenberger study.
This is the landmark research by Naomi Eisenberger. Detail the setup of this, because on the surface, it sounds like the most boring video game ever created. But the data it produced revolutionized psychology.
The brilliance of the Eisenberger study lies in its simplicity. They wanted to observe the brain in real time during a moment of social exclusion, so they placed human participants inside an fMRI machine.
And for those unfamiliar, an fMRI uses strong magnetic fields to measure blood oxygen level dependent or BOLD signals in the brain, right?
Exactly. Essentially, when a specific area of the brain is working hard, it needs more oxygenated blood. The scanner lights up to show us exactly which neural regions are firing at any given millisecond.
Okay, so the participant is lying flat on their back inside this claustrophobic, incredibly loud magnetic tube. What are they looking at?
They are looking at a small screen mounted inside the scanner. The researchers told the participants they were going to play a virtual 3-player game of catch called Cyberball with 2 other human participants who were logged into the network from different rooms in the hospital.
Sure.
The screen showed 3 little digital avatars, and they would toss a virtual ball back and forth.
But the other 2 players weren't real, right?
No, the participant was completely alone. The other 2 avatars were just a preset computer script.
Got it.
For the first few minutes of the game, the script is programmed to play fair. The computer avatars toss the ball to the human participant regularly. The participant pushes a button to throw it back. It is incredibly mundane.
Right.
But then the parameters change. The computer is programmed to suddenly stop throwing the ball to the human. For the rest of the scan, the 2 digital avatars just toss the ball back and forth to each other, completely ignoring the human subject pressing the button.
They are subjecting the participant to a simulated digital silent treatment. It is the exact adult equivalent of, you can't play with us on the playground.
Exactly. Now, logically, the participant is an adult. They know they're in a hospital scanner. They know it's a rudimentary computer game. The stakes could not be lower. It should just be mildly boring.
Well, who cares about a virtual ball?
But the fMRI scans revealed something spectacular. The moment the exclusion began, 2 very specific, deep regions of the participants' brains lit up with massive blood flow. The dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which we call the dACC, and the anterior insula.
And why is the activation of those 2 specific regions the smoking gun?
Because decades of prior neuroimaging had already firmly established what the dACC and the anterior insula do. They are the exact neural regions responsible for processing the affective component of physical pain.
Let's break that down for a second, because pain isn't just one thing. What is the affective component versus the rest of the pain experience?
Physical pain is processed in 2 distinct parallel tracks in the brain. The first is the sensory track. This tells you where the pain is and how intense it is.
It's the part that says, there is a sharp, localized burning sensation on my left index finger.
Right. But the second track is the affective component. This is the emotional distress of the pain. It is the suffering. It is the part of your brain that screams, ouch, I hate this. This is terrible. Make it stop.
It's the alarm bell of suffering.
Precisely. The Cyberball study proved definitively that the distress of being left out of a meaningless computer game activates the exact same distress alarm as stepping on a nail or burning your hand. The brain registers social exclusion as an acute crisis of suffering.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Because if we look at the research published in PNAS, the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences by Ethan Cross and his team, they took this overlap and pushed it even further.
They really did.
Because the Cyberball study proved that social pain and physical pain share the distress center. And that makes intuitive sense. We cry when we hit our thumb with a hammer, and we cry when our partner leaves us. But the Cross study found that the overlap doesn't stop at the emotional distress level.
The Cross study is a monumental leap forward, and frankly, it is astonishing. Cross and his colleagues hypothesized that if the social rejection was severe enough, far more severe than a virtual ball game, the brain might react even more intensely.
So they didn't just use a computer game this time.
No, they didn't recruit random volunteers. They specifically recruited individuals who had recently experienced an unwanted, highly traumatic romantic breakup, people who were deep in the throes of genuine heartbreak.
They found people whose social pain alarm was already ringing at deafening volumes.
Exactly. They put these heartbroken individuals into the fMRI scanner and ran a two-part experiment. In the first trial, they subjected the participants to a genuinely painful physical stimulus.
What kind of stimulus?
They strapped a thermal device to their forearm and heated it up until it was highly uncomfortable, simulating a hot coffee burn. This mapped out the individual's entire physical pain network, both the sensory and the affective regions.
Okay, so they have a baseline map of what a physical burn looks like in each person's brain.
Then came the second trial. They removed the heat. Instead, they had the participant look at a photograph of the ex-partner who had just dumped them and instructed them to actively think back to the specific moment they were rejected.
That is psychologically brutal.
Mm.
But what did the Boldy signals show when they looked at the picture of their ex?
The scans showed that looking at the photograph naturally lit up the distress centers, the dACC and the anterior insula, just like the cyberball game. But shockingly, two other regions lit up as well. The secondary somatosensory cortex, known as S2, and the dorsal posterior insula, or DPINS.
And those regions, S2 and DPMS, those are the sensory regions, right? The ones that tell you where the physical damage is happening.
Yes. S2 and DPNS are the neural structures that process the precise, physical somatic sensation of tissue damage. It is the raw data of bodily harm.
So let me make sure I am understanding the magnitude of this. If we pull up the brain scan of a participant experiencing a painful, searing physical burn on their forearm, and we compare it side by side with the brain scan of them just looking at a JPEG of the person who broke their heart, what does the overlap look like?
When Cross's team ran the comparative analysis, the neural activation between the physical heat burn and the romantic rejection was highly diagnostic of physical pain. The regions showed positive predictive values, meaning the overlap in the brain's processing of up to 88%.
88%.
Yes.
To your central nervous system, looking at your ex is up to 88% biologically identical to spilling scalding hot coffee on your own arm.
It is incredible.
A broken heart is not a poem. It is not an exaggeration. It is a literal somatic pain response generated by the exact same tissue in your brain that processes third-degree burns.
It completely validates the agonizing reality of human suffering in relationships. When a person tells you they feel physical pain in their chest after a breakup or a deep ache in their body after being ostracized by their family, they're not being melodramatic. They are reporting an entirely accurate, verifiable neurological event.
This leads us to a fascinating series of questions. If the brain is using the exact same hardware, the same neural outlet, to go back to our analogy, to process a burnt arm and a broken heart.
Right.
If the circuitry shared at an 88% overlap, do these two systems share the same glitches? Do they share the same vulnerabilities? And most importantly, do they respond to the same cures?
The data overwhelmingly says yes. Because the hardware is shared, a vulnerability or a modification in one system inextricably alters the other. Let's look at the foundational level, genetics.
Okay, genetics.
The sources highlight a specific genetic variation in the mu-opioid receptor gene. It's known as the OPRM1A118G variant.
The mu-opioid receptor. When I hear opioid, I think of the body's natural pain-killing system, endorphins and exogenous drugs like morphine.
You are exactly on track. The mu-opioid system manages physical pain relief. Now, individuals who happen to carry a rare variant of this gene, specifically the G allele, have a known, documented physiological sensitivity to physical pain.
Okay, so they feel pain more intensely.
Yes. In clinical settings, if they undergo surgery, anesthesiologists know they will require significantly higher doses of morphine to manage their post-operative pain compared to people who do not carry this genetic variant. Their physical pain alarm is just naturally set to a higher baseline volume.
Their hardware is ultra-sensitive.
Yes. But researchers understood the shared circuitry theory. They theorized that if the G allele makes you sensitive to a surgical incision, it should also make you sensitive to being left out.
Oh, what?
So they genotyped a group of participants, identified those with the G allele, and put them through the cyberball exclusion game in the fMRI.
And the results.
Just as predicted, those exact individuals who needed more morphine for physical pain also showed significantly greater, more aggressive dACC activity during the social exclusion game compared to the control group.
That is wild.
They reported feeling vastly more rejected. They were biologically, genetically wired from birth to feel a more intense level of social pain because their physical pain hardware was extra sensitive.
That completely reframes how we judge people's reactions. Someone who seems too sensitive to a slight might literally just have a different genetic pain threshold.
Yeah.
And this shared circuitry is a two-way street, isn't it? The physical affects the social, but the physiological state of the body can also artificially induce social panic.
Yeah.
I'm looking at the endotoxin study in our sources.
The endotoxin study is a brilliant, slightly unnerving demonstration of how deeply the immune system talks to the social brain. Researchers took perfectly healthy participants and injected them with endotoxin.
What is that?
Endotoxin is a safe, inert bacterial agent. It doesn't actually infect you, but it tricks your immune system into thinking you have a severe bacterial infection. It safely triggers a massive inflammatory response, releasing cytokines into the bloodstream.
So it makes the body feel like it has a terrible flu. You get the body aches, the physical sensitivity, the general misery of being sick.
Exactly. The physical pain threshold drops. But the researchers were tracking their psychological state simultaneously. As the physical inflammation spiked in their blood and the physical aches began, the participants' feelings of social disconnection spiked in exact tandem.
Getting sick made them lonely.
Yes. Getting physically sick literally made them feel intensely lonely, alienated, and depressed, and caused their dACC to overreact violently to social stimuli.
The brain is receiving a chemical signal from the body saying, I am damaged, I am inflamed. And because the wires are crossed in the dACC, the brain interprets that biological damage as both physical illness and social isolation. That is wild. We also see this cognitive bleeding in the other direction, where social context changes the physical sensation of pain.
Yes. The intentional pain study by Gray and Wegner proves that social betrayal amplifies physical suffering.
How do they test that?
In this experiment, participants received a series of electric shocks. The voltage of the shock was identical every time. However, the context was manipulated. In one scenario, the participant believed the shock was dealt accidentally by a computer glitch. In the other scenario, they believe a human partner in the next room was intentionally choosing to shock them.
So the physical stimulus is exactly the same, but the social meaning is entirely different.
And that meaning changed the somatic experience. When the participants believed the shock was intentional, a social betrayal, they rated the raw physical pain of the electricity as significantly higher, and their pain matrix lit up brighter on the scans. The social pain of the betrayal poured gasoline on the physical pain of the shock.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on this architecture for a second.
Sure.
I understand the overlapping scans, the 88%, the genetic links, but it doesn't entirely track with my lived experience. Think about it this way. I had a terrible, heart-wrenching breakup 10 years ago. If I close my eyes and focus on it right now, I can vividly remember the feeling, and my chest will actually start to get tight.
Right.
I can recreate the emotional pain.
Right.
But in high school, I also snapped my tibia in a skiing accident. It was the worst physical pain of my life. Yet if I close my eyes and think about the mountain, I don't suddenly feel a searing, agonizing physical pain in my leg bone.
That's a very good point.
If the circuits are identical, why can I infinitely relive the social pain, but I am protected from reliving the physical pain?
That is an incredibly astute observation, and it highlights a crucial boundary condition within the research, specifically identified by a researcher named Chen. While the real-time acute processing systems overlap extensively, the brain stores the memory of these traumas in vastly different ways.
Why would it do that?
Again, we look to evolution. It is highly maladaptive to constantly, viscerally re-experience the crippling physical pain of a healed injury. If every time you walked past the rock that cut your foot started bleeding and hurting all over again, you would be paralyzed.
You wouldn't be able to function.
You wouldn't be able to hunt or gather. The physical pain has done its job. You healed, you learn not to step on the rock. The alarm shuts off.
But the social alarm doesn't shut off.
No. Evolutionary psychologists theorize that endlessly reliving social pain is a highly functional adaptation. Social dynamics are fluid and complex, The agonizing memory of a social rejection serves as a permanent, active deterrent.
It's trying to teach you a lesson.
Exactly. It forces you to endlessly analyze your past behavior to ensure you never repeat the specific social faux pas that got you exiled. Reliving the breakup prevents you from acting in a way that would destroy your next relationship. It is an evolutionary mechanism to enforce social cohesion.
So evolution lets me forget the broken leg so I can keep walking, but it tortures me with the memory of the breakup so I learn how to be a better partner and stay in the tribe. It is a harsh, incredibly effective teacher.
It really is.
But let's move to the most bizarre implication of this entire deep dive, the cures. If the hardware is shared, logic dictates that the software patches should work on both systems. Can we treat a broken heart like a broken leg?
The evidence here is perhaps the most compelling part of the puzzle. Let's start by looking at how social support cures physical pain. Studies conducted by Master and Eisenberger took participants and subjected them to those painful heat stimuli on their arms. They found that if a participant simply held their romantic partner's hand while the heat was applied, their physical pain ratings dropped significantly compared to holding a stranger's hand or holding an object.
You could argue, though, that holding a hand is just a physical distraction. I'm focusing on the squeeze of the hand, so I am distracted from the heat.
The researchers anticipated that critique, so they removed the physical touch entirely. In a subsequent trial, they had the participants endure the heat burn while simply looking at a photograph of their romantic partner on a screen.
Just a visual stimulus.
Just a visual stimulus of social connection, and the results held.
Yeah.
Looking at the photo of a loved one measurably reduced the subjective feeling of the physical pain, and the fMRI scans showed a dampening of the activity in the dACC.
Wow.
The feeling of social connection literally acted as a physical analgesic. The brain said, I have social support, I am safe, lower the physical alarm.
And then there's the reverse. This is the absolute mind bender. If social support acts as a physical painkiller, what does a chemical physical painkiller do to social pain? I want to break down the DeWalt-Tylenol study in detail because it sounds like science fiction.
The DeWalt study is a monumental piece of psychopharmacology. DeWalt and his team wanted to test if they could chemically numb heartache.
Okay, how did they test that?
They took a large group of healthy participants and divided them into two groups. The first group was given a daily dose of acetaminophen, this is generic Tylenol. They were given between 1,000 and 2,000 milligrams a day, which is a standard, safe, over-the-counter dosage you might take for a sprained ankle or a headache.
Right.
The control group was given an identical-looking placebo pill. They followed this regimen for 3 solid weeks.
So they are walking around with a low-level physical painkiller in their bloodstream every day. What are they measuring?
Every single night, all the participants filled out detailed psychological surveys tracking their hurt feelings. They rated how much they felt rejected, slighted, ignored, or emotionally wounded by the events of that day.
And what did the data show over the 3 weeks?
By day 9 of the protocol, a massive divergence occurred. The group taking the daily acetaminophen began reporting significantly fewer hurt feelings than the placebo group. The physical painkiller was actively blunting their emotional reactions to daily social friction.
That is crazy.
But DeWalt didn't just rely on subjective self-reports. At the end of the 3-week period, he brought both groups into the lab, put them inside the fMRI scanner, and made them play the cyberball exclusion game.
He gave them the virtual silent treatment while half of them were under the influence of Tylenol.
Exactly. And the brain scans provided the undeniable physical proof. The participants who had been taking acetaminophen for 3 weeks showed significantly blunted, highly reduced activation in the dACC and the anterior insula when the avatars stopped throwing them the ball compared to the placebo group.
Their brains just didn't care as much.
Their brains did not register the same level of distress. The acetaminophen had chemically crossed the blood-brain barrier, interacted with the endocannabinoid system and the cyclooxygenase enzymes, and effectively silenced their brain's social distress alarm.
Okay, I have to pause here and issue a massive blinking red light disclaimer to the listener.
Please do.
We are absolutely not doctors. We are not giving medical advice. We are absolutely not suggesting that anyone listening should start popping Tylenol to get over a breakup or to deal with a toxic boss. Acetaminophen has very real, very dangerous physical side effects if misused, specifically regarding liver toxicity. Do not self-medicate your heartbreak with painkillers.
Yes, that is a vital caveat. The medical risks far outweigh the emotional buffering.
But from a purely scientific philosophical standpoint, proving that a physical chemical analgesic synthesized in a lab can shut down the neurological response to being left out of a computer game is astounding. It completely collapses the wall between the mind and the body. It proves the circuits are inextricably chemically linked.
It forces us to view emotional distress not as an abstract failing of character, but as a biological event happening in the physical tissue of the brain, subject to the laws of chemistry.
So we have thoroughly established the shared hardware. We know how it works, and we know how it can be chemically manipulated. But let's return to the psychological reality of everyday life. Since we know that genetics, immune responses, and past experiences can alter this shared circuitry, what happens to an individual whose social pain alarm is perpetually stuck on maximum volume?
Right. What happens when it's always on?
What happens when that dACC is just constantly redlining in response to the tiniest social stimuli?
This brings us to the psychological framework outlined in our sources from the Calm Network, specifically regarding a condition known as rejection sensitivity, or RS.
How do they define it?
Rejection sensitivity is defined as an intense, painful, almost allergic emotional reaction to the perception of being unaccepted. It goes far beyond the typical sting of rejection that we all feel.
How sensitive are we talking about?
For someone grappling with severe RS, an objectively minor, ambiguous slight, a text message that takes 4 hours to get a reply, a slightly flat tone of voice from a partner, a friend canceling a coffee date because they are busy, is instantly processed by the brain as a massive, catastrophic social exile.
The alarm system interprets a paper cut as a mortal wound.
Exactly.
Your evolutionary alarm system is just hyper-calibrated.
Right.
Where does that calibration come from? Why are some people wired to hear a siren every time the wind blows?
The sources outline a complex confluence of causes. Very often, it is rooted deeply in early childhood environments. If a child grows up in a home characterized by frequent, unpredictable criticism, harsh judgments, or a fundamental lack of unconditional emotional support, their developing brain learns a very specific lesson. Social bonds are incredibly fragile and constantly under threat.
The brain learns that it has to be hypervigilant.
Exactly. Chronic peer bullying is another massive trigger. If you are systematically excluded by your peers during critical developmental windows, your brain is forced to adapt. It becomes hypersensitive, constantly scanning the horizon for the next attack so it can brace for the impact.
It's a trauma response. The brain is trying to predict the rejection before it happens to mitigate the shock. But the sources also point out that this isn't purely environmental. There are strong neurodivergent links here as well.
Yes, the phenomenon known as rejection-sensitive dysphoria, or RSD, is incredibly prevalent in individuals diagnosed with ADHD and autism. And this makes logical sense when we look at the mechanics.
Oh, so?
Because these neurodivergent conditions often involve difficulties in intuitively reading subtle nonverbal social cues, coupled with inherent challenges in emotional regulation, the individual experiences the social world as highly unpredictable and volatile. When you can't easily read the room, every interaction feels risky.
That makes total sense.
This leads to a heightened defensive sensitivity to any perceived failure or rejection.
What does this look like in the practical reality of a person's life? If I am a listener wondering if I or my partner has this, what are the behavioral markers?
The signs are pervasive and often debilitating. It frequently leads to extreme risk aversion. The individual will not apply for the promotion, they won't share their creative work, and they won't ask the person out on a date because the anticipated neurological pain of a potential no is literally unbearable to contemplate.
The fear of the pain dictates their life choices.
Yes. It also manifests as intense social anxiety and a relentless, exhausting overanalysis of every single micro-interaction. They are the person wondering, why did she use a period at the end of that text instead of an exclamation point? Is she mad at me?
Oh, man.
And circularly, it creates this perpetual need for reassurance from their partners and friends, which can ironically exhaust those relationships and create the very rejection they fear.
Let's tie this back to the neuroscience, because there's a study by Birkeland and Cross that visualizes exactly what is happening in the brains of these highly sensitive people. And it is wild.
The Birkeland study is a brilliant piece of experimental design. They took individuals who scored exceptionally high on psychometric tests for trait rejection sensitivity, and they put them in the fMRI scanner. But they didn't subject them to the cyberball game.
What did they do?
They didn't reject them at all. They simply showed them visual art.
Wait, they just showed them paintings?
Yes. They showed them paintings by the American artist Edward Hopper.
Okay, I know his work.
Hopper is famous for his themes of profound urban isolation and loneliness. Think of his masterpiece, Nighthawks, the people sitting in the brightly lit diner late at night, physically close but emotionally disconnected. They contrasted these Hopper paintings with works by Renoir, which famously depict warm, vibrant, inclusive social gatherings and dances.
So they are contrasting the visual concept of isolation with the visual concept of inclusion.
Exactly, and the Baldi signals were incredible. Just looking at the thematic representation of isolation in the Hopper paintings caused huge, measurable spikes of activation in the dACC of the highly sensitive individuals. The mere abstract concept of loneliness triggered their physical pain matrix.
That is astonishing.
In a second trial within the same study, they showed the participants video clips of actors making disapproving, judgmental facial expressions. The participants knew these were pre-recorded videos. They knew the actors were not looking at them, and the disapproval had nothing to do with them personally. Yet their dACC fired aggressively anyway.
It makes me think of an analogy. Think about a car alarm. Inherently, a car alarm is a good thing. It protects the car from being broken into or stolen. That is our evolutionary social pain system. It protects us from being kicked out of the tribe. But rejection sensitivity is like a car alarm, where the calibration is completely broken. If someone throws a brick through the window, the alarm goes off. That's good. But with RS, a heavy truck drives by a block away and the alarm goes off. A single leaf falls on the windshield, the alarm goes off. A strong breeze blows, the alarm goes off.
That's a perfect way to describe it.
The alarm is technically functioning, but because the threshold is set so impossibly low, it ruins the daily life of the car owner. It drains the car's battery entirely, and it annoys everyone in the surrounding neighborhood.
That analogy captures the tragedy of the condition perfectly. The alarm is constantly depleting their cognitive and emotional resources, leaving them mentally exhausted and, tragically, creating the very relationship friction and distance they are so desperate to avoid.
This brings us to the most practical, vital part of our deep dive. Whether you are a listener dealing with a partner who is inflicting the toxic silent treatment upon you, or you are battling your own internal hyper-calibrated rejection sensitivity alarm. How do we fix this? We can't take Tylenol every day. How do we quiet these neurological sirens and actually heal?
The CALM framework, supported by broad clinical consensus, offers several highly actionable coping strategies. The first, and arguably most effective line of defense, is cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT.
Let's walk the listener through how that actually works in this context.
Yeah.
What does a CBT intervention for rejection look like?
CBT is designed to intercept and rewire automatic catastrophic thought patterns. Let's use the delayed text message scenario. You text a friend, and 4 hours go by with no response. The hyper-calibrated brain immediately jumps to the catastrophic conclusion. They are ignoring me, they hate me, I am fundamentally unlovable, and I will be alone forever.
The dACC is firing, the chest is tight.
Exactly. CBT teaches you to step into the gap between the stimulus and the panic. You consciously pause and force your brain to challenge that automatic belief. You ask yourself, what is the actual evidence that they hate me?
Okay, so you interrogate the thought.
Yes, and then you force yourself to generate 3 alternative benign explanations. 1, they are in a long meeting. 2, they left their phone in the car. 3, they are overwhelmed with their own life right now and forgot to reply.
You are forcing the prefrontal cortex, the logical, executive part of the brain, to override the primal panic of the dACC.
Precisely. You are consciously rewiring the cognitive pathway over time. The sources also heavily emphasize the practice of mindfulness.
Mindfulness has become such a buzzword. What does it actually mean in the trenches of a panic attack over rejection?
In this context, mindfulness is the practice of staying grounded in the present physical moment rather than allowing your brain to time travel.
Time travel.
Yes. When you are rejected, your brain instantly time travels to past traumas, remembering every other time you were hurt, and catastrophizes about the future, imagining dying alone. Mindfulness techniques, like deep somatic breathing or sensory grounding, pull you back to the present second.
Okay.
It allows you to observe the feeling of rejection, to say, wow, my chest hurts, I feel sad, without letting that feeling consume your entire identity.
It's observing the weather without believing you are the storm. And from a structural standpoint, the research strongly advocates for building self-esteem and creating a diverse, robust support network.
This is critical. We already proved with the hand-holding and photograph studies that social support literally acts as a physical and emotional painkiller. If you have a broad network of friends, family, colleagues, and community ties, you are diversifying your social portfolio.
Right. If you have all your money in one stock and that stock crashes, you are ruined. If your entire sense of belonging is tied to one romantic partner and they give you the silent treatment, Your brain perceives it as total tribal exile. But if you have a diverse portfolio, a rejection from one source hurts, but it doesn't trigger the evolutionary fear of freezing to death alone on the savannah. You have other campfires to go to.
Exactly. You learn to reinterpret rejection. You stop viewing a no as a defining referendum on your fundamental worth as a human being and start seeing it as an inevitable momentary glitch in human interaction. Sometimes people are just incompatible or busy or dealing with their own trauma. Their silence is about them, not your intrinsic value.
And bringing this all back to the 2026 systematic review on the silent treatment, the researchers emphasize a critical point for couples navigating this dynamic. Silence itself, whether it is an agreed-upon timeout or a momentary shutdown, isn't always the absolute death knell of a relationship.
No, it's not.
It is the transition from silence back to dialogue that determines the survival of the bond.
This is the most crucial takeaway for relationship longevity. If a period of withdrawal is eventually followed by repair-oriented, constructive communication, the relationship can survive and even strengthen.
They have to talk about it.
The couple has to sit down and discuss what triggered the shutdown. The giver must explain their emotional flooding, and the receiver must articulate the pain of the exclusion. Together, they build better protocols for the next conflict.
But if they don't do that, if the ice just thaws naturally over a few days and they just start talking about what to have for dinner without ever addressing the freeze.
If the underlying triggers are left completely unresolved, the cycle is guaranteed to repeat. This cements a chronic dissatisfaction, an atmosphere of walking on eggshells, deep emotional exhaustion, and a slow, inevitable deterioration of intimacy. You cannot sweep the biological pain of ostracism under the rug.
So we have covered an immense amount of ground today. We started by smelling the crayons in a 1989 kindergarten classroom, watching Vivian Paley construct a safety net for children by banning social exclusion. We traced that exact same primal human vulnerability all the way into adulthood, exploring how the silent treatment weaponizes our deepest needs for belonging and existence.
It's a huge journey.
We journeyed into the magnetic core of an fMRI machine to see the undeniable proof that a broken heart and a broken arm share up to 88% of the exact same neural circuitry. And we explored how holding a loved one's hand or the pharmacological mechanism of Tylenol proves that our physical and emotional lives are completely, inextricably intertwined.
It is a profound realization. The biology of human connection is as real, as tangible, and as mechanically complex as the biology of our bones, our immune systems, and our lungs.
I want to leave you, the listener, with one final provocative thought to ponder as you go about the rest of your day. We just spent this entire deep dive proving that our social pain system was forged in the fires of human evolution. It was built to keep us alive in small, ancient hunter-gatherer tribes. In that ancient world, being ostracized meant freezing to death or starving alone in the unforgiving wilderness. Stakes were literal life and death, so the neurological alarm had to be deafening.
It was a perfectly designed survival mechanism for the savannah.
But look at the world we live in today. Look at the technology you are probably using to listen to this right now. We carry that exact same ancient life-or-death neurological alarm system around in our pockets. Every single time someone leaves your text message on read, every time an acquaintance unfollows you on Instagram, every time you see a picture on a timeline of a dinner party you weren't invited to, or you get excluded from a trivial group chat, your primal brain does not know the difference.
No, it doesn't.
The dACC fires. Your biology reacts as if your literal physical survival is at stake. You are fighting a caveman's life-or-death battle over a glowing rectangle of glass.
It is the ultimate evolutionary mismatch. We are navigating a hyper-connected digital world using the hardware of an ancient hunter-gatherer.
So, how might understanding this evolutionary ghost inside our modern machines change the way you navigate your digital and social life tomorrow? The next time you feel that sharp, suffocating sting of a digital rejection or the cold shoulder from a coworker, I want you to pause. Feel the tightness in your chest. Recognize the alarm bells ringing in your dACC. And remember, you are not dying. The tribe has not left you to freeze. It is just an ancient, clumsy alarm echoing in a modern world. Take a deep breath, silence the alarm, and step back onto the playground. You're allowed to play.